The hotel room is small, unremarkable. Generic furniture, beige walls, a window overlooking a busy Tehran street. It's late afternoon. A woman sits on the edge of the bed, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She's European, traveling on a German passport, supposedly here for a textile conference. Her real name doesn't matter. What matters is the plastic vial in her handbag, no bigger than a lipstick tube, filled with a substance that could burn her cover to ash if discovered. In 6 minutes, a man will knock on this door. As an Iranian nuclear scientist, mid-level, ambitious, he thinks this meeting is about business, maybe romance. He has no idea that the woman across from him works for Mossad, and that the next 60 seconds will determine whether he lives as a free man or becomes a target that Israeli intelligence will track across continents for years. She hears footsteps in the hallway. Her pulse spikes, but her face stays calm. The knock comes. 3 taps, exactly as arranged. She stands, smooths her dress, and walks to the door. Her hand hovers over the handle. Behind that door is a man who might be building a weapon designed to incinerate her country. Inside her bag is a weapon of a different kind, invisible, patient, and nearly impossible to escape. She opens the door. He smiles. She smiles back. And in that moment, she knows that if anything goes wrong in the next 10 minutes, if he notices the faint residue on her fingers, if the dust settles visibly on his jacket, if hotel security decides to sweep this floor, she will disappear into an Iranian prison and never be seen again. How did an Israeli agent end up trapped here, betting her life on one impossible trick? For decades, Israel's intelligence community faced a brutal reality. Iran was building nuclear capability, and the people making it happen were ghosts. These weren't generals giving speeches or politicians signing treaties. They were engineers, physicists, metallurgists. Men who lived quiet lives, drove ordinary cars, and showed up to work at facilities buried in mountains or hidden inside industrial complexes. Men who knew how to disappear. Traditional surveillance methods hit walls. Physical tails required massive teams and risked exposure. Electronic monitoring was difficult when targets worked in air-gapped facilities with no internet access. Satellite imagery could track buildings, but not individuals. Human intelligence, the gold standard of espionage, required getting close to people who were trained to spot infiltration and who operated inside one of the most paranoid security states on Earth. By the early 2000s, Mossad had identified dozens of Iranian scientists working on weapons-grade enrichment and warhead design. They had names, rough schedules, and occasional photographs. What they didn't have was a way to track these men once they left controlled environments. No way to know where they traveled, who they met, or when they might become targets for something more permanent than surveillance. The answer came from an unexpected place: Cold War radiation detection technology, repurposed for the age of asymmetric warfare. The concept was elegant and terrifying. If you could dust a target with radioactive particles, microscopic and undetectable to the naked eye, you could track them anywhere on Earth using specialized scanners. The particles would cling to clothing, skin, hair. They would shed onto car seats, office chairs, hotel beds. Everywhere the target went, they would leave a trail of invisible breadcrumbs that Mossad could follow for weeks or even months. But theory and execution are separated by an ocean of risk. The operation required getting operatives into Iran, getting close enough to scientists under surveillance, applying the dust without detection, and then extracting that agent before Iranian counterintelligence realized what had happened. One mistake, one paranoid security sweep, one unlucky customs inspector with a Geiger counter, and the entire network would collapse. And yet, Mossad decided to move forward. Because in the calculus of intelligence work, the ability to track Iran's nuclear brain trust across borders and through safe houses was worth almost any risk. The first challenge was the dust itself. It had to be radioactive enough to register on detectors, but weak enough not to harm the target or raise alarms at checkpoints. Too strong, and airport security might flag it. Too weak, and it would dissipate before operatives could track it. Israeli scientists settled on a compound that emitted low-level gamma radiation, particles so small they could pass through fabric and bond to organic material. The half-life was measured in weeks, giving Mossad a narrow operational window. The second challenge was delivery. Direct contact was ideal, but impossible in most scenarios. Scientists didn't shake hands with strangers. They didn't accept gifts from unknown sources. Mossad needed vectors that felt natural. Hotel lobbies, conference halls, restaurants, cars, anywhere a target might sit, lean, or touch without suspicion. The operatives, chosen for dust operations, were a specific breed, not soldiers, not the stereotypical Mossad assassin. These were men and women who could blend into civilian environments for days or weeks at a time. European cover identities were preferred: business people, academics, journalists, people who had plausible reasons to be in Tehran or Damascus or Istanbul, people who could endure the psychological strain of carrying radioactive material through hostile territory, knowing that if they were caught, their own government would deny their existence. Training was obsessive. Operatives practiced application techniques hundreds of times. Dust could be hidden in the lining of a briefcase, inside a pen, or on a treated piece of paper. The key was making contact feel accidental. A handshake, a brush in a crowded hallway, sitting in a chair the target had just vacated. Some operations used dusted documents slipped into the target's briefcase during a moment of distraction. The particles would transfer on contact and spread from there. Sayanim, non-official Mossad assets living abroad, played critical support roles. A hotel manager in Istanbul might ensure a specific room was assigned to a target. A taxi driver in Vienna might guarantee a certain scientist ended up in a particular vehicle. These were people who owed loyalty to Israel but had no official intelligence training. Their involvement was surgical and temporary, reducing the risk of blown networks. The operational concept was layered. Once a scientist was dusted, Mossad didn't need constant eyes on him. Instead, they positioned detection teams at strategic choke points, airports, border crossings, and routes known to be used by Iranian intelligence. Detectors were concealed in luggage, briefcases, even clothing. When a dusted target passed through a monitored location, the radiation signature was logged, and analysts back in Tel Aviv built a pattern of movement. But the setup also revealed a flaw that nobody wanted to admit out loud. If Iranian counterintelligence ever realized that radioactive tracking was in play, they could turn the entire system against Mossad. They could dust their own people intentionally, leading Israeli operatives into ambushes. Or they could sweep suspected individuals with detectors, identifying Mossad's priority targets, and then isolating them in secure facilities where no tracking method could follow. The operation would only work as long as it remained invisible. And invisibility in espionage is a temporary condition. The first successful dusting happened in Dubai. The target was a mid-level physicist involved in centrifuge design. He was attending a metallurgy conference, staying at a 5-star hotel. Mossad had an operative posing as a Swiss manufacturing consultant. The contact was brief, professional, and utterly forgettable. A handshake, a business card, a chair in the hotel bar where both men happened to sit within 10 minutes of each other. 48 hours later, radiation detectors at Istanbul's Ataturk airport registered the signature. The physicist was traveling to Turkey under a false identity, using a route that avoided direct flights from Tehran. Mossad now knew he was part of a covert logistics network. Surveillance teams were activated. His contacts in Istanbul were photographed. His next destination was logged. The dust was working exactly as designed. But success bred ambition, and ambition bred sloppiness. Over the next 18 months, Mossad dusted at least 6 Iranian scientists. Some operations were clean. Others pushed the boundaries of acceptable risk. In one case, an operative in Vienna dusted a target's car by brushing against the door handle in a parking garage. The dust transferred, but security cameras caught the operative's face. Mossad had to burn that cover identity and pull the agent out of Europe entirely. Then came the operation in Tehran, the one that nearly destroyed everything. The target was a senior engineer working at the Natanz enrichment facility. High value. Direct access to classified centrifuge designs. Mossad wanted him marked, not for immediate assassination, but for long-term tracking. The goal was to map his entire network, every meeting, every contact, every safe house. To do that, they needed the dust on him inside Iran, not after he traveled abroad. The operative was a woman, traveling under German cover. She posed as a textile buyer meeting with Iranian manufacturers. Her legend was solid. Her Farsi was fluent enough to handle casual conversation, but accented enough to justify moments of hesitation. The meeting with the engineer was arranged through an intermediary, a businessman who owed Mossad a favor and had no idea what his introduction would actually facilitate. The plan was simple: a brief meeting in a hotel, a dusted document left behind, and extraction within 24 hours. But Iranian intelligence had started noticing patterns. Foreign business people showing unusual interest in individuals connected to sensitive programs. Meetings that seemed professional but led nowhere commercially. Surveillance teams were activated. Hotels frequented by Westerners were watched more closely. The woman didn't know any of this when she sat in that Tehran hotel room waiting for the engineer to arrive. What she did know was that the meet felt wrong. Too easy. The engineer was too eager, too willing to meet a stranger in a semi-private setting. Either he was careless, which didn't fit his profile, or he was being used as bait. She had two choices: abort and lose months of preparation, or proceed and hope her instincts were paranoid rather than accurate. She chose to proceed. The engineer arrived. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. She left the dusted document on the table, concealed inside a product catalog. He picked it up without hesitation. She walked out of the hotel, heart pounding, and made it 3 blocks before she saw the tail. 2 men, professional, keeping distance but clearly locked on her position. She had maybe 10 minutes before they moved in for a closer look, or worse, for an arrest. Her extraction plan assumed clean exit. This was anything but clean. She ducked into a crowded bazaar, using the chaos of vendors and shoppers to break visual contact. Her phone was in her bag, but she couldn't risk calling her handler. Not here. Not with the possibility that Iranian intelligence was already listening. She made it to a safe house, a small apartment in a residential neighborhood maintained by a Sayan who didn't ask questions. She stayed there for 36 hours, listening to footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the knock that would mean capture. It never came. Either the tail lost her, or they decided she wasn't worth the diplomatic incident. She exfiltrated through the northern border, hidden in a truck carrying textiles to Azerbaijan, exactly as her contingency plan outlined. But the damage was done. Iranian counterintelligence now knew that something was happening, even if they didn't understand what. And that meant every subsequent operation carried exponentially higher risk. The engineer who was dusted in Tehran disappeared. Not dead, not arrested, just gone. His radiation signature vanished from every checkpoint Mossad monitored. For 3 weeks, analysts assumed had been moved to a secure facility or placed under house arrest. Then, the signature reappeared, but not where anyone expected. It showed up in Damascus, then in Beirut, then in locations that made no operational sense for an Iranian nuclear scientist. Someone was moving the dust deliberately, testing to see if it would be followed. It was a message: "We know you're tracking something, we don't know what, but we're watching." Mossad faced a decision: shut down the program entirely and lose one of the most effective tracking tools that ever developed, or double down and risk exposure. They chose a middle path. Suspend active dusting operations inside Iran, but continue to monitor existing signatures and focus new applications on targets traveling abroad. This shift led to one of the program's most significant successes. An Iranian scientist traveling to Malaysia for an academic conference was dusted at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The operative was posing as a fellow academic, someone attending the same conference. The contact was a handshake at a coffee stand. Brief, forgettable. The dust transferred cleanly. Over the next 6 months, that scientist's radiation signature appeared at 3 different locations in Malaysia, 2 in Singapore and 1 in South Korea. Each appearance was logged, and surveillance teams were deployed. The scientist was meeting with procurement specialists, people who sourced dual-use technology for Iran's nuclear program, technology that couldn't be purchased openly due to international sanctions. Mossad passed this intelligence to Western governments. Some of the procurement networks were dismantled. Some were left operational but monitored, allowing intelligence agencies to map the entire supply chain. The dust had done more than track one man. It had exposed an entire covert logistics operation. But success came with a cost. The more Mossad used radioactive tracking, the more risk accumulated. Each operation left traces, not in the traditional sense of blown covers or captured operatives, but in the pattern itself. Intelligence analysts on the other side were paid to notice patterns. And eventually, someone in Tehran or Damascus or Hezbollah's intelligence wing would connect the dots. That realization came in Beirut. A Hezbollah operative, someone connected to Iranian intelligence sharing, began experiencing unusual symptoms: nausea, fatigue, hair loss. Doctors ran tests. They found elevated radiation exposure, low level, but consistent. The operative hadn't worked with radioactive materials, hadn't been near any known contamination sites, but he had met with an Iranian scientist 3 months earlier, a scientist who was, at that moment, under active Mossad surveillance. Hezbollah leadership didn't understand the full scope, but they understood enough. They began sweeping their own people with radiation detectors. Anyone who had recent contact with Iranian nuclear personnel was checked. Some showed trace exposure. Others didn't. The pattern was inconsistent, which made it more terrifying. It meant that someone, somewhere, was using radiation as a weapon or a tool, and nobody knew how widespread the contamination was. Panic is a force multiplier in intelligence work. It makes people sloppy. It makes them second-guess every handshake, every meeting, every piece of paper passed across a table. For a brief window, Iranian and Hezbollah operational security tightened to the point of paralysis. Meetings were canceled. Travel was restricted. Scientists were kept inside secure facilities. Mossad had won a tactical victory, but they had also lost the element of surprise. The program's invisibility was gone. Radioactive tracking didn't end with exposure in Beirut. It evolved. Mossad adapted the methodology, using different isotopes, shorter half-lives, and more targeted applications. The program became a tool of last resort, reserved for high-value targets when no other option existed. Other intelligence agencies took note. Some reportedly experimented with similar techniques, though none confirmed it publicly. But the deeper legacy of the operation isn't technical. It's ethical and strategic. Mossad had turned the human body into a tracking device without consent, without warning, and in some cases without regard for long-term health consequences. The radiation levels were low, but not zero. Every person dusted carried a small, invisible burden. Some scientists showed symptoms. Most didn't, but none of them knew they had been marked. This raises uncomfortable questions that intelligence communities still wrestle with. When does covert action cross the line from espionage into something darker? If a target is building a weapon that could kill millions, does that justify turning their body into a surveillance tool? And what about the people around them? The hotel staff who cleaned their rooms, the taxi drivers who transported them, the family members who lived in the same house. Radiation does respect operational boundaries. It spreads. Mossad's position, never officially stated but implied through their actions, was that the risk to Israeli civilians from an Iranian nuclear weapon justified almost any covert measure short of mass civilian casualties. The dust didn't kill. It didn't maim. It simply marked. And in the brutal mathematics of intelligence work, that made it an acceptable tool. But acceptable to whom? The operatives who carried it into hostile territory knew the risks they were taking. The scientists who were dusted had no choice. They were conscripted into a shadow war without ever knowing they were participants. Some might argue they forfeited the right to consent the moment they chose to work on weapons programs. Others would say that violating someone's body, even in microscopic ways, is a moral line that should never be crossed, regardless of the stakes. There's also the strategic question of blowback. Once Iranian intelligence understood that radioactive tracking was possible, they adapted. Security protocols changed. Radiation detectors became standard equipment at sensitive facilities. Some scientists were rotated out of programs entirely, not because they were compromised, but because the paranoia around who might be dusted became operationally untenable. And then there's the precedent. If Mossad can dust Iranian scientists, what stops other intelligence agencies from doing the same to Israeli officials, or American diplomats, or anyone else deemed a priority target? The technology isn't particularly complex. The isotopes are accessible. The only real barrier is the willingness to cross that ethical line, and once one agency crosses it, others follow. That's how intelligence norms erode, slowly and then all at once. The scientists who were tracked using radioactive dust are, in many cases, still alive. Some continued their work, some left their programs, a few were assassinated in unrelated operations, their deaths attributed to Mossad but never confirmed. The dust didn't kill them directly, but it mapped their lives in ways that made them vulnerable, and the operatives who carried out these missions. Some are still active, others retired, carrying the weight of decisions that seemed clear in the moment but grow more complicated with distance. One former Mossad officer, speaking anonymously years later, described the program this way: "We gave ourselves permission to do something that felt necessary at the time. Whether it was right is a question I still can't answer. If you were in that hotel room in Tehran, knowing what you were about to do, knowing the risks and the consequences, would you have made that call? At what point does the defense of your country justify turning ordinary lives into part of the battlefield, even if those lives belong to people who chose to build weapons?" These questions don't have clean answers. They never do in the world of covert intelligence. What remains is the operation itself, a cold, invisible, and devastatingly effective tool that reshaped how intelligence agencies think about tracking, surveillance, and the human cost of espionage. If this operation opened your eyes to how real spy work actually operates in the shadows, subscribe to Hidden Ops for more true missions from the world of covert intelligence.